Seif Gimel. Auf dem, was die Gemara teitscht, Eire zu Teira, fragt man. So on this, what the Gemara translates how Eira, what it says in the Megillah, is a reference to Teira. So the question is asked, Teira wird allemal angerufen mit Namen Eir, Loshin Zacher. So in Hebrew grammar, Eir, light, is always spelled that way, Aleph Chaylam Resh, in the masculine, Lashon Zachar. Favashteta Oira Lashon Akeva. So how come suddenly here we use a feminine expression, Oira, which in short, when you put a hey, a lot of words in the Hebrew language, you put a hey to it, it turns it into a feminine form. And for the Alter Rebbe, as Teira, da meint men Teira Shebal Peh, says the Alter Rebbe, answers the Alter Rebbe, Teira is a reference to Teira Shebal Peh, the oral Teira. Was sie ist mekabel von Teira Shebiksav. The oral Teira is a recipient of the written Teira, because you have the written Teira, the Chumash, and then from that, it gets funneled into the oral Teira. The Rebbe steht da Eira Lashon Akeva. Very interestingly, that's why Eira over here in the Megillah, which it's talking about the oral part of the Torah. I guess he'll explain it here. Yeah, he's going to explain it. So a feminine is always the recipient. So the man, the muscular, is the giver, and the woman, the feminine, she's the receptacle. She's the recipient. The Unterschied from Teira Shebiksav and Teira Shebal Peh is. So this is the difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah. And the written Torah is the Chumash, the oral Torah is the Talmud, the Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch, etc. So here's the difference between the written and the oral. Torah Shebiksav is Hecher von Ha'inyan von Seichel. The written Torah is something that's beyond logic. Alle wissen, dass Teira Shebiksav hat der Eibishter gegeben zu Moshe Rabbeinu auf den Berg Sinai. We all know Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah, the written Torah, when he was on Mount Sinai. Und selbstverständlich, als der Zugang zu Teira Shebiksav ist nicht mit kein seichelige Chakiris. It's self-understood that our approach to the written Torah is not something that has a psychological understanding to it. Until purim, there's many different discussions. Nor mit amunah, when we approach the written Torah, it's with pure amunah, with the perfect faith that this is what Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu, and we got to follow it to the T. So that means there's really no room for discussion and analyzing it, etc. in the written Torah. However, when it comes to the oral Torah, the whole point of the oral Torah is precisely to understand and give many different philosophical explanations. Das, was es steht in kurz in Teira Shebiksav, und also ich zu Aresleinen Dinim, welche stehen nicht in Teira Shebiksav befeirisch. That if you open up any page of Gemara, for example, you'll see they quote a pasuk from the Torah, anywhere from Tanakh, and they extrapolate and they take it apart. Maybe the Torah means this, maybe it means that. Durch Vergleichen und bringen sichtige Reis. A lot of the analyzing of Teira Shebiksav is with philosophical proofs. As wie bald in Teira Shebiksav steht din azay nazay, since Torah wrote a certain halacha, so and so in this specific way, is er von verstandig als sich bei an ander Fall darf sein derselbe din. So we're going to compare. If Torah wrote something in this case, so we're going to compare it with another case. And here the Rebbe brings some examples. Something known as hekesh, that we compare. I'm trying to be thinking of an example offhand. The Mishkan, it says why does it place Shabbos next to Mishkan? This is just my own, just to give you an example. So it's a hekesh to show you whatever was considered a work for the building of the Mishkan. So we compare that to Shabbos, that Shabbos too, that we are prohibited, and that's where the 39 malachis come from. So that's hekesh. Next, the Rebbe brings is a kalva v'chemer. This is a very famous thing. You say if, I'm bringing an example, just if when it's 40 degrees outside, you're wearing a coat, how much more so when it's 10 degrees outside? For sure, you're going to be wearing a coat. Anyway, so this is all in the realm of the oral Torah. Torah Shebal Peh, there you could make many different comparisons, many different philosophical understandings. Kommt der Geist aus Torah Shebal Peh is an ihnen was ist abgegeben geworden zum Seichel. So the bottom line is, Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, is something that's very much connected to Seichel, to understanding. Und von deswegen ist der Zugang von jedem Eichel Torah Shebal Peh mit Amunah. But wait a second, the Rebbe says something very mind-boggling. We said before that Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, that we approach it with pure Amunah. Every single word in the Torah is exact. We come to Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah. There suddenly we start bringing in philosophical explanations. But here the Rebbe suddenly says, no, even Torah Shebal Peh, even that we have this approach with Amunah. Men paskent nit wie es kommt aus in eigenem Seichel. Meaning that when we have a psak, we need a verdict. We need to know, what do we do? How do we blow the shofar in Rosh Hashanah? How do we shake the lulav? So when we make that psak, we don't do that with our own seichel. Even if you have strong proofs that you should not pass in a certain way, if there is a contradiction with the previous generation Paiskim, which was widely accepted, is a psak din, even in times of the Mishnah, that's way at the beginning of halacha. Even then, im halacha hin nekabel, there in the Mishnah it says that if that's the halacha, fine, we will accept it. Chach afilu az ledin yes tshuva, even though you could bring a philosophical proof to disprove that. If this is the halacha, that's it. It stays. So in other words, you could philosophize and you could analyze as much as you want, but when it comes to the psak halacha, there are certain guidelines that we have to follow, and that's it. We have to stick to those to those guidelines to make a psak din. Kemedach Tainen, says the Rebbe, someone could come along and argue, sitaicht. I'm not sure what that means. Sitaicht. Wollt sich es gehandelt wegen Ihnen von Torah Shebiksav, ist das nicht übergegeben geworden zu Seichel. If we're dealing with the written Torah, again, the Tanakh, as we said before, it's not something that you have to philosophize. Whatever is written in the written Torah, you got to take it as is. Wie bald aber as in Torah Shebiksav steht nicht in dem Beferisch. But the problem is, you can't really take the words of Torah Shebiksav literally, because it doesn't tell you the din clear out. It doesn't tell you exactly how to blow a shofar, exactly how to put on tefillin. For that, you gotta come to the oral Torah to tell you exactly how to do a mitzvah. And again, like we said before, the oral Torah, that's something where you do use your seichel. Und die Paisken, welche haben abgepasst in dem Din mit der früher. Now these Paisken that already set the din in a previous generation, haben sie doch lechura sie gepasst, nor weil sie haben gehabt auf ihm seichel reis. They passed it because they did use their seichel. So what's going on here is wie bald as bei ihm in sein seichel kommt es anders. Since by you, with your seichel, you're looking at a halacha that was written, let's say 300-400 years ago. You're looking at the halacha and you say, wait a minute, I'm understanding this differently. How could they have paskened this way when I am understanding it differently? Was hat sich zu rechnen mit sehr psak? So why should I obey a psak that was given 400 years ago if today I'm opening up the Shulchan Aruch and it doesn't make sense to me? So it's a very confusing. That's what the Rebbe's question is. You're telling me that the written Torah, you got to use emunah there. Whatever is written is written. But when it comes to Torah Shabbal Peh, suddenly we're supposed to use our seichel. So wait a minute, if you're supposed to use our seichel, so why can't I just decide whatever halacha I feel that it's supposed to be today? What's this thing where, it was a psak was given, this is what's written in Shulchan Aruch, I gotta follow it. But wait a minute, that you said that about the Torah Shabbat. Why are you suddenly bringing in emunah in Torah Shabbal Peh? So, and for them, so the answer is, as the Zugang zu ihnen zu Torah Shabbal Peh is emunah Yireh Shamayim. Says the Rebbe, no. Even Torah Shabbal Peh, hey, it's still Torah. It's not like God forbid, the Torah Shabbal Peh is a whole new Torah. It's the same Torah. It's just explaining Torah Shabbat. So that means you do have to have emunah and Yireh Shamayim even when we approach the Torah Shabbal Peh. The Chazal Zagen, as it says in Pirkei Yavis, Kol sheyiras chetik kedemis lechachmasei, chachmasei miskayemes. That whoever has the fear of sin as a prelude, as a before that prefaces his wisdom, only then chachmasei miskayemes could his wisdom endure. Havade darf take muz zayin chachmasei. So obviously, in Torah Shabbal Peh, you need to use your not knowledge and logic. That's the whole basis of Torah Shabbal Peh, that you do use your logic, Chachma and Seichel. Aber wenn is Chachmas miskayemes, but there is a condition to that. When could your Seichel, when could your logic endure? When can the Chachma haben akim? You need to make sure that your Yiras Chetei comes as a prefaces your wisdom. Wenn sein Yiras Chetei is bei ihm früher und Hakdama zu der Chachma. Only when the fear of sin comes before as a basis to your knowledge. So in other words, it's not just pure, it's pure chachma, you're just purely using your seichel. No, you got to have Yireh Shamayim built into to that seichel. Das ist wenn der Unterschied echt zwischen die Tzedukim und die Perushim. A very interesting analysis between, what's the difference between the Tzedukim, the Sedosis or something, that's what they're called. Basically people that didn't believe in Torah Shabbal Peh. What's the difference between them and then what's called Perushim? Not sure myself what the Perushim. Perushim is people that separate themselves from the world. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe the Rebbe will explain. So like this, in the written Torah, the Tzedukim did not argue. Whatever it says in the Torah, that's it. You can't argue with that. That's something that Hashem clearly gave to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the hallmark of our belief system as Jews. That Eibishter gave the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu. So that the written Torah, the Tzedukim do not argue with. Das haben sie verstanden. They understood. Okay, there's a concept of there's a Torah. Hashem gave the Torah to Moshe, and you can't deny that. And this is regardless if it makes sense or not. This is what we got to accept, because this is the Torah that Hashem gave to Moshe. What did they argue on? This whole concept of the oral Torah. Since this is a psychological thing, wait a minute, you're telling me, you're opening the door, you're saying just go ahead and use your logic. Okay, so I'll go ahead, I'll use my logic. Whatever makes sense to me, I'll do, and whatever it doesn't. And that's sadly today. You have the reform movement that they decide, well, this thing we're going to keep, this thing it doesn't really make sense. Doesn't make sense to keep men and women separated during services. Come on, families, husbands and wives want to pray together. So okay, who cares about the mechitza? That's exactly what the tziddukim said. You're telling me that I could use my seichel, my logic. Okay, I'm going to be using my seichel. Und sie dürfen sich nicht rechnen mit Kabbalah's Chazal, and they disregard different things that we have a tradition from generation to generation from the Chazal, from our sages. Der Zugang von die Pirushim is aber. So this is all the approach of the Tziddukim. Again, the Tziddukim people that they believed in the written Torah, because that too nobody can argue with. Whatever is written is written. But suddenly, when you come to Teresh Shabbat, he said, no, we don't believe in that. We don't believe in the tradition of Chazal. That just because the sages of 2, 3, or thousands of years ago said something, so just because they said that, we have to accept it. This is Teresh Shabbat. It's an area where we could use logic, so we don't have to follow their logic. We will follow our logic. Now let's see what is the approach of the Prushim. Just like Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu the written Torah, simultaneously, the Rebbe underlines the word b'shas ma'aseh. This at the same time that Hashem gave Moshe the written Torah, He also gave him Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah. The Ontishay does know. So what's the difference if they're both given from Hashem to Moshe? What's the difference? As di hater is gegeben b'ksav, that this written was given written, that physically the Eibishter gave it to Moshe as a written document. Und di, the other one, the oral, hater gegeben bal peh, Hashem gave it to Moshe orally. That means Moshe did not write it down. Teresh b'ksav is nit angetan in seichel, und Teresh b'al peh is angetan in seichel, which tells us that, as we said before, over and over, that the written Torah is not something that's connected with logic, and the Torah Shebal Peh is, connected to logic. It says, aber mer nit was Torah Shebal Peh is gekommen in alle Wush von Seichel. It's that it clothed itself into Seichel. Sie ist aber dieselbe Torah. It's the same exact Torah. It's just that the oral Torah clothed itself, put on clothing of like different glasses, different lenses of the oral Torah. Which of course comes from Hashem. Was is Herr von Seichel, and Hashem is beyond Seichel, und der Zugang zu darf sein Emunah, and therefore we have to approach even the oral Torah with Emunah. So I guess Prushim are the people like me and you that do follow the Torah today. Not just the written, but everything that's written in Shulchan Aruch and Peskim that we follow. That's the approach of what he calls the Prushim, which is the true approach. So again, what do the Prushim say? That both the written Torah and the oral Torah were exactly equally given by Hashem. It's just one of them. It's only in other words, it's a technical difference. This one was actually written down. Moshe took a physical quill and parchment and he wrote it down, and the other one he just had in memory. And when he came down from the mountain, he gave it over orally to the Jewish people. And by the way, for many generations, it was contained in an oral fashion. Nobody wrote it down. It wasn't until the times of the Mishnah, some, 900 years later, or maybe more, that's when the Mishnah was actually written down. Thus, is there so now the Rebbe just went off on a whole tangent, just trying to explain to us this whole difference between there's a written Torah and the oral Torah, and why it's so important to approach even Torah Shebal Peh with perfect faith. Now let's bring this. Let's go back to what we spoke about in the beginning of the Sikha, which is about what it says in the Megillah, that Eira, and the Chazal say in the Gemara that Eira is a reference to Torah. The Rebbe asked a question, why is it written Eira with a hey, which makes it feminine? Now we can understand why. This is why Eira, which is Torah, this is what separates us from the going from the other nations of the world. And again, the Rebbe is stressing the point that even Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral Torah, which is clothed in logic, in Seichel, hält sich an bei Eden Kedusha Heiligkeit. Even in that, screams from holiness. Euch in them is by the Ikar Amunah. Even in there, it's so noticeable that there is Amunah in here. Versus Herchef and Seichel, something which is beyond logic. So in other words, we're using logic because the Torah Hashem wants us to use the logic, but we're not getting stuck in the logic. We are being conscious of the fact that this too was given from the Eibishter.